everyone, welcome back to Aus Football Talk. Hope you're all having a wonderful week and are ready to dive into the world of Australian football. We've seen the Socceroos play out friendlies in America with 2 losses to Venezuela and Colombia. The A-League Women's has continued and Riley Tanner has announced herself as one of the players to watch this season. And Melbourne City's Asian Women's Champions League campaign has gone off without a hitch. 3 wins from 3, 15 goals scored and a certain teenager putting on a show. I hate when people complain about stuff like this. Here's a young player playing with confidence, making fans excited, and people are more concerned about what happens afterwards. Who cares? It's fun to watch at the very least. We're going to dive straight into the main topic for this episode because in the last week we've seen the PFA's A-League Women's report and unfortunately it was damning. A number of issues were highlighted ranging from the internal management of clubs to the league's depleting attractiveness both against other codes domestically and football leagues abroad. But everything that's not going right on and off the pitch eventually steers back to the lack of professionalism, which is starting to come to a head.
I think the biggest thing for us is to have players on full-time contracts, so 12-month contracts at a minimum and multi-year deals.
Professionalism in women's sports or any arguments about pay is always a contentious issue. Those not in favour will always bring up finances and revenue as the key reasons why, saying they should be paid relative to the money they bring in. In this case, it's probably important to note the argument isn't necessarily equal pay, but just being paid a livable wage and being provided an environment and circumstances where the athletes in our premier women's football competition can focus on just that. Because when you're trying to meet the demands of professional football, and A-League women's players do have expectations to commit to the sport in a professional manner, but also need to worry about another job on the side or even as your main career so you can afford to survive, it puts players in a really difficult position.
And we're losing quite a lot of good quality players to the sport that are very talented due to having to balance work and football, which is probably something as a professional footballer you shouldn't have to do, as it should be your job, and something that I think a lot of even men's players, when you tell them, oh, I've got to go to work after, they're so shocked because obviously that's not what it should be like when you're a professional footballer.
It's a precarious situation. A quote I saw on Roundball Australia from an anonymous A-League women's player said, "I've been getting in trouble for calling out of work and asking to leave training or gym early, and it's been really bad, disappointing both my bosses and coach, and I don't know what to do." That's not sustainable for a professional competition. Obviously the dilemma is a lot more complicated than they should have more money, let's give them more money. Australian football isn't exactly rolling in dough. But the future of women's football in Australia is on a tightrope. So with that, let's talk about professionalising the A-League Women's, what holds it back, and why it might be necessary. And we can start with the report the PFA published, which, like I said, highlighted a number of issues. The A-League Women's is the least preferred league amongst its players, despite being one of the most preferred only a couple of years ago. The A-League Women's is failing to keep up with other women's sports leagues in terms of payments, and sports-related psychological distress, anxiety and depression have increased amongst A-League women's players. It also showed fans overwhelmingly support players becoming full-time professional. The USL has become a threat to A-League women's retention and the potential increase in transfer revenue that would come with full-time professionalism. So what actually stops the A-League women's from becoming a full-time professional competition? And believe it or not, it's not crowd numbers. The A-League women's is on par mostly with the Div 1 in France and La Liga F in Spain, aside from Barca, both fully professional with much higher minimum salaries to what we have in Australia. Unfortunately though, the biggest barrier is finances, but more so that Australian clubs as a whole are running on tight constraints. It's no secret a lot of Australian clubs are struggling in this area. Clubs overseas have stable environments, men's side that underpins a club's value, as well as much better sponsorship and broadcast revenue. And this just isn't a luxury we have in Australia at the moment. It didn't necessarily have to be like this though. An area like sponsorship should have been a key focus coming out of the Women's World Cup for all clubs and the league itself. Unfortunately, that boat is now missed. Between this and the subsequent lack of professionalism though, it means the A-League is falling behind the rest of the world and also the competition locally at an alarming rate.
So 2020, the sport had done well to actually pay women's players well, and it was always the kind of a rising tide lifts all boats mindset when it came to how other sports looked at this. It was like, okay, if you guys are paying that, we don't want to lose our players, we're going to pay a little bit more. Unfortunately, since then, A-League women pay has basically stagnated, and the horrifying stat was that the average pay for A-League women's players is seemingly lower than the minimum pay for the other women's sport leagues. So
the report from the PFA compared the minimum salaries in the A-League women's to the other major female sports leagues in Australia, and the differences between 23 to 2025 is stark. The Super Netball went from 40 to 45,000, the NBL saw a $9,000 increase, NRL went from 30 to 41 after being at just 10 in 2022. The women's AFL went from 51 to 67, and the women's BBL was just shy of 50,000 in 2022. Then went to 72 in 23, and now is 75,000 despite reducing the number of games they play and having a similar average crowd to the A-League women's. And what was the increase for the A-League women's in that time? 1,500, from 25,000 to 26.5. The A-League women's as recently as 2020 was the second most lucrative league in Australia, and now you're guaranteed almost double the money in the 4 major competitions, despite the fact you play for half the time, as it's pointed out here.
We've, fought for a good minimum wage, but then stats come out that it's half of what the next professional women's sport is in Australia.
I saw the post today about the minimum wage for the Ninja A-League, and I was surprised, obviously without knowing anything.
Yeah.
It's like drastically less.
The AFL women was 67?
Yeah.
And they play like 10 games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're at 22 rounds?
Yeah.
22 rounds.
Yeah.
It's a 9-month season with the preseason, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
It is full time. It's no joke. And what was ours?
Well, like 25,000.
Yeah, which is
ridiculous.
It's unlivable.
Seriously, it is incredibly ironic that the A-League women's and the women's NBL have the lowest wages despite playing the most games. But looking outwards to the rest of the world, leagues are catching up to us and eventually surpassing us. The A-League women's used to be a league where some of the world's best players would split their time with the NSL. Now the USL, effectively the USA's second tier, as much as they refuse to admit it, has the pull to attract some of the better A-League women's players, whether that be Americans returning home or some of our own heading over. The Canadian Super League 2, since that has started, has already grown further than the A-League women's.
Each NSL team is expected to have $1.6 million initial salary cap for 20 to 25 players on their roster, and the minimum player salary is $50,000. For comparison, Spain's top flight women's league has a minimum salary of approximately $25,000, and in Italy it's less than $40,000.
Professional competitions for women's football are continuing to increase around the world, and that's a good thing, of course. And it may be unreasonable to hold the expectation that the A-League women's will be the best football league in the world. Competition from the WSL and NWSL, as well as various top clubs around Europe, will always be there. But for the A-League to go from a league where an active and reigning Ballon d'Or winner was plying her trade, to a league Australians don't even want to play in is disappointing. Taking all that into account, you have a league that operates for a serious length of time, crowd numbers not dissimilar to what you see elsewhere, with an historic reputation that's only falling behind because the remuneration has stagnated. So when it comes to the question of whether the A-League women's should be professional, the answer really is an absolute yes. Unfortunately, due to the environment it operates in, the question of whether it can be is a very grey area. On one hand, asking already cash-strapped clubs to fork out more capital is a tough and maybe unfair ask. On the other hand, the advantages to a fully professional setup for the women's could be tapping further into a market that's arguably growing more than any area of sport right now. And the PFA is on the front foot in highlighting this.
What if we told you that investing in full-time professionalism for the A-League women would pay for itself almost immediately? The incredible growth of women's football globally challenges our ability to retain talent, but the flip side is that the industry now offers significant football and fan revenues if we invest in our players as elite athletes.
It highlights a series of economic impacts. The A-League women's gaining a further share of global transfer revenue, which they predict to rise from 1 to 5%, increased prize money in Asia as more clubs per nation are admitted into Asian competitions from 2027, FIFA continuing to introduce global women's club competitions, and increased domestic support. Their research shows fans follow progress, highlighting the fact that the WSL saw a 200% increase in crowds following professionalism. And there was also this little dig at the APL in there.
Now, once again, the powers that be are sitting on a potential gold mine and worrying that a shovel might be too expensive.
Whatever side of the fence you sit on, that's objectively funny. From that recent PFA report, the other points that need highlighting are that 67% of players surveyed said they've experienced psychological distress, 1 in 5 have said their financial situation is not at all secure, and less than a quarter actually feel properly secure. That is extremely damning. As competition grows from various angles for our talent pool, it's extremely important players are in an environment where they feel safe and secure, not just financially, but in all aspects of their personal and professional life. The A-League Women's has come to a crossroads in its development. There's certainly been progress from where it started, but in recent years there's been a clear stagnation aside from the World Cup sugar hit. That time really was the best opportunity for meaningful structural change, and the second best time is now, following on from the Women's Asian Cup, especially if the Matildas can be successful. I'm not ignoring the fact that to do this would be to take an enormous leap of faith, but the upside to this investment could be massive for clubs. It's a market that's growing continually, where if we play our cards right, we may be a leader in. It's a chicken or the egg situation in terms of what comes first, the investment in the game or the game to make money. In this case, the investment coming first is probably necessary.
You got 2 products, right? One has been around for so long and has had so many years of development. Your newer product is brand new, fresh. You would put more money into your newer product because it needs to catch up. So this is what I was talking to this former Matilda. I'm not gonna say who it was, but she was saying to me, and it makes a lot of sense. It's like, if you want the women's game to be big, you can't just put the same investment as something which has been around for over 100 years. You have to invest more. The women's game should be getting more investment than the men's game.
That might be hard to hear, but it's true when you really think about it. The important thing is to ensure it's not money wasted and there's a clear market to make it viable. As I said earlier, it just needs owners who are willing to take that leap of faith. And now, Don Costanzo on the upcoming Derby d'Italia in the Australian Championship Final Series.
APIA in the quarterfinals of the Australian Championship. What's the vibe like around the club?
After that last game against Bayswater, it was a big week in preparation, knowing that, one, we're going to hopefully get the win to get a win over them because they beat us the first time. But yeah, and then we knew what it meant. Finishing first put us in a good spot going forward. Yeah, and it was always going to work out that it would end up be up against Marconi.
How's the squad found playing in the Aus Championship as well, considering it is its inaugural season?
A bit of a different vibe, I think, knowing, especially with that first week, going, all right, we're training in preparation, going to travel an away day to Adelaide. So like we trained the day of the game. It was a little bit different, just the travelling aspect.
Derby d'Italia quarterfinal, what's the prospect of that like?
I had a feeling it was always going to happen from when I left. I thought, it's written in the stars. There's somehow, I'm not sure how it's going to work or the format or which way it goes, but somehow we're going to verse each other.
You've seen both sides of that fixture this season, of course. Are you expecting anything different from Marconi?
I'd like to think that I got a pretty good idea on what they're going to do, but yeah, you just never know. Well, it's easy for me to say, yeah, I know exactly what they're going to do and write it up, and then they go and do something totally different. You know what I mean? You just never know.
What sort of reception are you expecting on Friday?
Oh, well, I think it helps my favour that we're playing at home. We're playing at Leichhardt, so maybe a few boos back at Market. Nah, I'm not too sure. I still speak to a few people in and around the club and a few of the supporters, so I don't know. I'd like to think there's no hard feelings, but once it's game day in a derby like that, I think things could change pretty quickly.
How are you finding life at APIA since you signed?
I got along with most of the boys before I'd made the move off the field. Now that I'm their teammates, I think, well, I'd like to think that I'm blending in. I feel that I am, unless they're only mucking around and they talk shit about me behind closed doors. No, I think I've blended into the culture quite well.
What was the reasoning behind making the move now rather than, say, at the start of the 2026 season?
I still feel as a player, I still aspire to go to the next level. And after 4 years, I had a bit of interest in the A-League and overseas. I just thought, you know what, there's going to be a new set of eyes on this championship. There's going to be, I'm sure there'll be people looking. Just a totally different way of playing, I think, Marconi and APIA. It's just nothing wrong with how Marconi play. I just think APIA play a different style of football, and maybe even the way they play suits me a little bit better. My main focus was, I'll go get into a new team and just see what happens, put my name back out there.
This APIA side, how far do you think the side could go on the Aus Championship?
It'd be wrong for me to say that. I don't think that we can win it. Before I even came to APIA, I thought they had the team to win it. If you look at our team compared to maybe some of the other teams, it's just depth. Like, look at even that first game, we had Kambiashi coming off the bench. Like, where else? Where are you going to get that? You know what I mean? You got the boys that are starting, very good, but the boys that are ready to make an impact,
even better.
One of the biggest storylines leading into the Australian Championship, Don Costanzo crossing the Italian divide in Sydney. And you can catch the full chat on this channel as well. On that, the Australian Championship final series gets underway this weekend, and the 4 quarter-final ties are going to be good viewing. Avondale and Moreton City Excelsior sees Victoria's best team up against Queensland's best. Moreton were probably an outside chance to make the final stage. Sydney Olympic were on paper maybe the side more likely to go through, particularly when you look at how they prepared for the tournament and who they brought in. But Moreton staying undefeated in the back half of the group stage was enough to see them go through. Avondale are Victorian Premiers, Oz Cup semi-finalists. They'll want success in this competition too. Then there's Heidelberg and Metro Stars. Heidelberg speaks for themselves. Australia Cup finalists, Victorian champions, probably the favourites heading into the tournament. But Metro Stars have reigned supreme in South Australia over the last few years. 3 titles in a row. This is a massive opportunity for them to show Australia just how good they can be.
Talking about Heidelberg, when it comes to the crunch, we play quite well against the big team, so we're looking forward to it.
Then South Melbourne versus NWS Spirit. Look, Preston may have been the preferred matchup here for a lot of fans. A South Preston match in this context would have been massive. But that shouldn't discredit what this matchup can bring. Spirit were premiers in New South Wales ahead of APIA, Marconi, Rockdale. That's no easy feat. But considering they went into the tournament losing their coach, losing their start striker, they're not insignificant losses. So to galvanise in those circumstances, bringing in Adon Kara has proven to be fruitful. It's impressive they are where they are. Facing South Melbourne won't be easy, especially away. As much as it's been a year to forget for them in this tournament, they've been excellent. They've brought in the right players to turn things around and arguably look like the best team in the comp. So that should be a cracking match. The main fixture though has to be that Derby d'Italia matchup between APIA and Marconi.
For the 5th time in 2025 and 92nd in history, but none bigger than Friday night when West's APIA meet Marconi again.
Even aside from the history, it's the only fixture with 2 sides from the same state and the only matchup between 2 foundation clubs. The fact that they are rivals makes it all the more better. This is probably the biggest fixture between the 2 sides in the modern era of Australian football. And they've played title-defining league games, Australia Cup qualification matches, but to meet on a stage like this is massive. And it speaks further to what the championship is all about, giving ambitious clubs a platform to showcase themselves on a bigger stage. I spoke in depth about the championship last week and the challenges it's faced so far, but the best thing about the final series is that we'll start to properly see it at its peak. High drama, great atmospheres, and a great test of what clubs are capable of on and off the pitch. It should be exciting, and if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, definitely something to get behind. That's the show. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, drop a like on the vid, subscribe, it helps me out greatly. We'll be back next week, so I will see you then.